Perfect. I'm starting the recording. I would like to introduce today's speaker, Jim Ferris. Jim has 30 years in restaurant management, working with McDonald's, Harvey's, Swiss Chalet, and finally with Pizza Hut as an owner-operator. After he retired from the food industry, he worked for 5 years as an international frozen fruit trader. He most recently spent 6 years in residential real estate with Remax. He is currently inactive in real estate, but has kept his license. He's changing his classification from real estate to website management as a 15-year project comes to fruition. Since 2005, he's been working on a website called globalfish.net, which is a trading platform for buyers and sellers of fish and seafood on an industrial and commercial scale. And as for the past year, has been importing fresh and frozen seafood for retail sale in Montreal area stores and restaurants. He's in his 4th year as a Rotarian, looking forward to becoming club president in July. Me too. And today he's going to be talking to us about everything you may or may not want to know about the fish you eat. Welcome, Jim Ferris.
Thank you very much, Heather. I've got Joan Samuels phoning me. 2 seconds.
Jim,
Joan?
I'll take care of Joan. I will take care of Joan.
It's okay. I'm going to put you next to the computer so you can hear anything. I'm about to start my presentation.
Okay.
So sit back and relax.
You're kidding.
Hello, everybody. Just before I start, I would like to welcome my girlfriend from Israel, Tal. I saw you come on a little bit earlier. If you see a flaming red head there, everybody, she's come on, and very, very happy to see you, Tal.
Hey.
I'm now going to make this a lot easier for everybody so that you don't actually have to look at me. And I'm going to start sharing my screen, and we'll see what happens here. Okay. And can everybody see that?
No.
No. You can't see a picture of me from 45 years ago? Me and my fish? Oh, don't do this to me. Hang on. Oh, I guess I have to click on it, supposedly. Hang on, from the beginning. How's that?
You're in business.
Okie dokie.
Fish. One of you is looking really good.
Yeah, thank you ever so much for that. You don't need to mute people, Heather, until they really get nasty. Okay. Okay. Some of the things I'd like to discuss today, I would talk very quickly about my reclassification. I'm now officially the VP of Data Management and Site Coordination for globalfish.net and B2B Food Services Net. Heather's pretty well explained that, so I'll flash over it in a moment. In the meantime, after that, I'm going to give you a small introduction to the fish industry, some facts and figures, talking about the wild catch techniques throughout the world, the farming techniques, and then stuff that I could spend hours talking about, but I'm going to go very quickly through the sustainability of the fishing industry and also the requirements of traceability within the industry. Globalfoods.net, you can kind of think of it as an eBay for fish and seafood. It's designed for large users and sellers of fish and seafood to trade online. The company does not actually buy or sell any fish. It simply provides a platform so that, let's say, the Murmansk trawl fleet in Russia can sell to Gordon's Seafood, who are processors in the United States and in Canada. The site gives people the ability to negotiate and to conclude sales contracts. And the big thing about it is that it has a full traceability system that you can track the product from the source right down to the consumer. And we'll talk more about that later. In terms of the data management, I've compiled this database of about 16,000 fish species and names that are on this website, and about 1,500 characteristics by which you can describe a product. It isn't necessarily rocket science, but it is an extremely, extremely detailed business. Another small business we have is B2B, and basically there we've been importing and selling fresh and frozen fish for restaurants and food wholesalers over the last couple of years. Of course, the frozen fish business or the restaurant business has been absolutely decimated. So that business has basically died over the last 3 months. Some of the products we have been bringing in, though, were salmon and swordfish, pollock, sole, bream, sea bass, haddock, a lot of octopus, and some tuna. I have a disclaimer here, and that disclaimer simply is that A, I'm not a fisheries expert. B, some of the comments that I'm going to make or some of the things that I'm going to show are not necessarily my editorial comment. It simply is showing some of the issues that are facing the fishing industry today. And you may be surprised, since we're Westerners and mostly North Americans, you may actually be surprised at some of the things that are being eaten around the world. So now, without any further ado, everything you ever want to know or not about the seafood that we eat. We're going to talk about the good, we're going to talk about the bad, and we're going to talk about the ugly. This is a real fish. This is what is known literally as the blobfish. It lives about 3,000 meters under the sea, and this is what it looks like when it comes to the surface. So if you want to eat that, it's all yours, baby. There are about 525 families of fish, which comprise 34,000 species and come up with over 300,000 common names. As an example, tuna, there's 8 species of tuna. You work your way up, and shrimp, there are over 2,000 different species of shrimp in the seas.
Les thons, 8 espèces des 19 espèces.
There we go. In 2016, world production totaled 171 million tons. That's 376 billion pounds of fish total. And of that, a little bit over half of it was produced by farming, by aquaculture. If we had had this talk 15 years ago, it would have been 10% for aquaculture and 90% for wild. And we're going to talk a lot about that over the next few minutes. In terms of the consumption, 151 million tons of that, about 80% of it is strictly for human consumption, and about 20 million tons is for non-food uses like pet food and animal feed and fertilizers and that kind of thing. Per capita, we're eating about 20 kilograms of food, from fish food, every year. So the next question is, where does our fish come from? We'll start with the wild catch. The FAO, which is the Food and Agricultural Organization of the United Nations, has identified 27 regions in the world that are fishing districts. On top of this, you've got subdivisions for each of these, and you've got sub-subdivisions. So when a fishing boat comes in, it normally should be able to tell you almost to the exact latitude and longitude where they caught the fish. And this becomes very, very important in the traceability concept. Wild caught sources, 40% of the world's wild catch is coming from 5 countries. And you'll notice that the top 3 are all Asian. The USA comes in at 5% and Russia has 5%. Canada's contribution to the world catch is somewhere in the area of 1%. It's quite small, considering that we have 3 coasts and one of the longest coastlines in the world. And the difference, the reason for that is because all of these countries have major fleets. They have huge companies with boats that go out, 400, 500 foot long boats that can catch and process and package right on the boat. Canada, we've always been known as a country of hewers of wood and drawers of water. Most of our fleets tend to be quite small, the typical kind of thing that we see on the east and west coast with the dories or the small trawlers going out that are maybe anywhere from 50 to 100 feet. But we do not have a huge commercial fishing industry, believe it or not. What is being caught in the world? Well, we'll start with the number 6 most caught wild fish in the world, and that is Pacific salmon at about 1 million tons, or over 2.5 billion pounds of wild Pacific salmon. The interesting thing about this is we do call it wild Pacific salmon, but it is stocked. There are over 6 billion small salmon that are raised in hatcheries and thrown into the ocean every year. This is a fishing industry that is very, very widely sustained by man growing fish on land and then throwing them into the ocean. Here's one I'll bet you've never heard of. Number 5, the large head hairtail at over 1 million tons. This is so common over in Asia. It's a fish. It is an ugly, ugly thing. It normally runs between about 3 and 5 pounds, and you can see how cylindrical it is. And it gets cut up into steaks, and very, very prevalent throughout the Asian countries. Number 4 on our list, we've got our old friend, the cod. There's basically 4 different species of cod that are caught, and it's become a delicacy over the last 30 years since the cod fishery got brutalized back in the 80s and 90s, and most of it got shut down. It's kind of an ugly looking fish when you see it up close. And it was for years and years, it was maligned. People didn't want to admit that they had cod. You made cod liver oil with cod. Back in the 70s and 80s, and even into the 90s, McDonald's filet of fish was known as the North Atlantic whitefish sandwich. And it was just cod. I'm sure everybody now is fairly familiar with the Alaska pollock. You've very, very seldom have had it on your table, I bet. But here in Quebec, we know it as goberge. We run into it in the stores when we see fake crab and seafood, quote unquote, for salads and that kind of thing. Again, this is a fish that is hugely, hugely prominent in northern waters, both in the Pacific and in the Atlantic. There are fleets that go out and just catch this fish. Here you've got over 7 billion pounds of the fish being caught, and they average, again, they're around a 4 or a 5 pound fish. So you got to catch a lot of them. Number 2, now we're getting familiar, 5 million tons of tuna. And we'll talk a little bit about tuna later on. There's 8 main species, and it's considered one of, certainly on the, I would say from the Western point of view, this is one of the most common and most beloved fish. However, after that, you go the #1 caught fish in the world. Now I've combined them here, but they're all basically the same, are the anchovies, the herrings, and the sardines. Over double of what the tuna is. It's at 10 million tons or 23 billion pounds of fish. So that's a lot of cans of, for me anyway, greasy, oily fish. The way they catch fish is something that is very, very controversial around the world. There's all kinds of things that you can say about the way our fish are caught. As I said earlier, I'm not here to editorialize. If we didn't catch fish these ways, we wouldn't have enough fish to feed people. And the fishing industry around the world is actually doing its best to try and mitigate some of the bad things that happen when they catch fish. The first one on our list is the purse seine. This is one of the biggest ways of catching fish. And you can see how you can just haul up anything. The photo on the side is actually quite small in terms of what's coming up. The diagram on the right-hand side, that net can be 2 kilometers wide and 0.5 kilometer deep. They're huge. And the problem with these things, they go out and they're looking for dense schools. Here I've mentioned the tuna and the mackerel, but it can be done for all kinds of other things. And the problem with this is that it catches up everything in its path. If a turtle gets caught in here, if a dolphin gets caught in here, a shark, it doesn't matter what. It comes up, it gets caught in the net when the net closes at the bottom and becomes what we call bycatch. And you'll see later, 30 to 40% of all the fish that are caught in the world are bycatch. They are not the fish that the fishermen are trying to catch. You put a turtle in here, it's going to come up drowned or crushed to death by the fish that are in it. If you get a shark in here, it's probably going to die because it needs to really move to get oxygen over its gills. A dolphin or anything else doesn't have a chance. The next one are bottom trawlers. And this is kind of like a purse seine, except they drag it along the bottom and they pick up everything in its path. And it's picking up coral, it's picking up just absolutely anything that's down there. And this is a very destructive way of fishing. But again, it's very, very widely used, again, for the bottom dwellers. And there's more and more work being done to try and avoid this kind of thing. Another real tough one is the dredger. It's kind of like the bottom trawler, only this is like a huge chain. And it gets dragged along the bottom, and it's meant to pick up mussels and oysters and clams, all the things that really don't swim. And it just scoops them all up. It churns up. The good thing is it doesn't normally get coral because it's normally used in areas that are more muddy, but it churns up the bottom and it just destroys absolutely everything in its path. A little less dangerous are long lines. And this is where a boat can put out lines behind the boat, and it can have literally thousands of hooks on it. So it's not like you get a nibble and you drag it in right away. They'll drag this around for hours at a time, and then when they feel that they've probably got enough to make it worthwhile, they haul it in. Well, and what they're hauling in again is a huge bycatch. A dolphin can get caught in this, the sharks get caught in this, the turtles, all kinds of things can get caught in here. So it's a pretty invasive thing also. Gill nets, again, another one. It's a great idea. The fish come in, their gills get caught, and as long as it's the right kind of fish, this is good. If you're an air-breathing mammal and you get caught in this, then you're going to have problems. You're going to come up and you're going to be dead. Now, some of the better ways of catching, they're very, very labor intensive, but in some of the industries, they're becoming more and more used.
For the people who are listening right now.
One of them here is excuse me, our long trolling lines. This is kind of like a long line boat, but the lines are not nearly as long and they don't have as many hooks on them. So when the fisherman knows that there's something there, they reel them in quickly, they remove what they want, and they can release whatever it is a bycatch. Again, even simpler are poles and lines, and these are used for open ocean swimmers like tuna and also cod. I've caught codfish with a long line, and it's basically just a rope that's put overboard. They're normally in relatively shallow waters. You put it down towards the bottom, you feel a little tug, and you haul the thing in. Hand line and jigs are the same kind of idea, except they're normally lower or closer to the surface. Again, they can pick up a lot of tuna. A lot of albacore tuna and yellowfin tuna is caught this way. They might have several hooks on it, but again, they get hauled up early, and the fishermen are able to release the unwanted catch. We move on to aquaculture or fish farming. This is a lot older than you might think. They were farming fish in China over 2,000 years ago, 3,000 years ago. And even in China and Japan today, you'll see where they flood their rice paddies. They'll flood them to nourish the rice. And at the same time, they will put fish in, normally carp. And when the time comes to drain the paddies to harvest the rice, they also harvest the fish at the same time. The Romans were farming oysters during their time. In the 13th century, mussel farming was invented. During the Renaissance, one of the most popular fish in Europe was the carp, and they were held in artificial ponds. Rich people would have what they called an aquarius vitae, which was basically a fish tank, and the guests could pick their own fish. The 19th century, with the Industrial Revolution, brought a lot of pollution. It brought dams. It caused a lot of issues for natural fishing, and it spurred the introduction of artificial breeding at this point. In 1950s was basically the invention, of artificial granulated food, and this was the thing that allowed the farming industry to really become vital within the world. Now, of course, here in the 21st century, over 50% of the fish that we eat today is farmed, and we'll take a look at some of those now. 96%, almost all of the farmed fish in the world is coming from Asia. China, Indonesia, India, and a few other Southeast Asian countries. It's almost all coming from there. It is growing around the world with different varieties, but this is where it started, and this is where the bulk of it is. Number 5 on our list, though, is our favorite Atlantic salmon. 2.5 million tons of this stuff is being farmed every year. There's virtually no such thing as a wild-caught Atlantic salmon unless you're a sport fisherman. The interesting thing about the Atlantic salmon is that 28% of it is farmed in Brazil, in the Pacific Ocean. About 10% of it is harvested in Australia and in New Zealand. The biggest single producer is Norway, followed by Scotland. And Canada produces, get this, 1% of the Atlantic salmon in the world. We hear about all the horrible things about fish farms and this and that. Canada is 1% of the fish market for Atlantic salmon. 15 years ago, it was 20%. But again, this is how things around the world have overtaken us. Number 4 on our top favorite list is the tilapia. 10 years ago, nobody had heard about this fish. Now you can't go anywhere without seeing it. Generally speaking, it runs from about 1.5 pounds. A big one might be 3 pounds. They're quite small, but the great thing about this fish is that they'll grow almost anywhere and in anything. They're generally speaking a tropical water fish or more of a warm water fish, but they can do quite well. They're farmed in the United States and all around the world now. 7 billion pounds. Followed by everybody's favorite, I hope, shrimp. Over 4 million tons a year are farmed. I would say, and I'm being a little inexact here, I would say it's probably today at least 2/3 to 80% of all the shrimp in the world are now farmed. Clams. Would you have thought that clams would have been number 2 in the world? This is the again, more of an Asian and a European thing. We talk about clams here, we talk about clam chowder and that kind of thing, but it's not something I think generally that people see on the menu on a day-to-day basis by any stretch of the imagination. Now, everybody hands up, what is the biggest farmed fish in the world? Here we've got the clams at 4 million tons. At 23.5 million tons, we have carp. This is the king of the world. There are hundreds and hundreds of species of these things. It is an absolute staple throughout China and the Orient and all of the Asian countries. They can grow anywhere from, goldfish are carp. The koi that you see in cute little ponds are carp. Then you can get up to the big carp that can be 40, 50, 60 pounds. We know about the carp, the Asian carp that has been invading the waters in North America, working their way into the Great Lakes now. Once they're in, they take over. But they're the biggest single caught and used fish in the world. However, when you're talking seafood, the single biggest harvest of seafood in the world is seaweed. Double what you see for carp. 66 billion pounds a year of seaweed are being consumed. Again, very, very big in tropical, subtropical countries. But it has a history in Norway, Scotland, and around the North Sea. Here in Canada, we all know what dulse is. coming up from Nova Scotia and New Brunswick. But it's just amazing how much of this stuff is farmed. And the great thing about seaweed is that it's self-sustaining, and it just grows back. It's a wonderful, wonderful product. A lot of this stuff is used also for food production in terms of emulsifiers, stabilizers, and so on. But most of it is actually eaten. Now, some of the farming methods that we can talk about here. This is an irrigation ditch in the Congo. Now, most of you may know that the Congo doesn't really have a coastline, but they grow fish. Wherever there's some water flowing, you can grow fish. And these kinds of ponds, now this is mostly for sustenance farming, obviously. This is not going out and being packaged around the world, but this kind of thing feeds an awful lot of people around the world. You'll see, again, in the tropics, you'll see houseboat rafts with cages under them. And basically, they raise the fish underneath. They can catch them wild and then raise them and fatten them up. And again, mostly for their own use, but also for local sale. Ponds up in the mountains. Again, I was talking about the Romans with their aquariums and so on. You can do this anywhere. When you start getting serious about this stuff, then we start talking about in-ocean farming. And there's an awful lot of controversy about this, obviously. And this particular picture here is actually in Nova Scotia. And you have three different things going on here. One of these nets has Atlantic salmon in it. Another one has lobster, and another one has mussels. So but it's all done inside. Now, I had pictures of, we've all seen the pictures of the red effluent that was pouring out. We saw it last year on the news and everything else. And I don't really want to get into that stuff. But there's all kinds of issues, obviously, about the pesticides that are used, the fish waste that is created, the mixing with wild species, and so on and so forth. They're working to try and mitigate all of these issues. I did put the picture in. This is a picture offshore in British Columbia of the plant in BC that was when it was producing its fish, when it took its farm fish and then was killing them and producing them. This is what they were putting 300 yards off the coast. Ranching is another funny one, and this is a big issue right now in the Mediterranean. They have huge ponds or nets in the middle of the Mediterranean, and what they do is they catch wild tuna. They put them in pens, much, much larger than these ones, and then they feed them sardines and all kinds of other things over the course of 6 months to a year, and then they butcher the fish and market them. The only problem with this is that they're taking wild fish, they're putting it in the pen, and then they're killing it. So they're not reproducing anything. They are simply taking the fish, they're not putting back into the system at all. And it's becoming a real huge issue, particularly for one of the most beautiful fish in the world, which is the bluefin tuna, a tuna that can go up to 1,000 pounds. And these things are caught, put in things like this, and without retrieving eggs or anything else. More and more, the future is going to be inland farming. Now, this is a shot of a fairly large complex in Brazil. You're seeing this more and more in Canada, the United States, and in other countries. It's going to take a while for this kind of thing to really develop, partly because it's so expensive, and it's not without its controversies. You do something like this inland, and you got to figure out where does the water come from. There's millions and billions of gallons of water that are required for this, and it ends up being mostly fresh water that we're pulling out of aquifers. So it has its issues too. So these are all things that are going on within the industry, and with the intent, obviously, of keeping us with our seafood. In the farming business, the older methods of slaughtering the fish were basically asphyxiating them one way or another. They either knocked them out with carbon dioxide, or they simply brought them out into the air to asphyxiate, which takes for an average fish about 15 minutes to die. And then there's the just taking them out of the water, cutting their throats, and letting the blood run out of them. And even at that, fish tends to live for 4 or 5 minutes. So these are not the most popular ways of killing a fish. What is becoming more and more common now, again, particularly with the inland companies, is electric stunning. You can run a current through an entire pool of fish, kill them all within a second and a half, and have 10,000 or 20,000 fish ready to be produced. So that's something that's becoming more and more common now. I'm gonna take a little break and drink my wine just to get my mouth back. This next subject, sustainability, is something that we could talk about for hours, but I'm going to cover it very quickly because I know we're coming up towards the end of my period here. And with all the different ways of catching fish, the way we're depleting the seas and so on, obviously as a world we have to act. We need to decide where our fish going to come from in the future. Will there be any wild fish in the future? And is it strictly farming? There's a lot of things that are going to happen, and that it's happening quickly. Over the next 10 to 20 years, you're not going to recognize the fishing industry at all. 90% of the world's fish stocks are now fully fished or overfished. That comes from the FAO, Food and Agricultural Organization of the United Nations. As much as 30% of the world catch is caught illegally. And as I mentioned earlier, as much as 40% of the catch is bycatch. It's 63 billion pounds a year that is lost. Even you would think that even like for the bycatch, if you were able to keep it and use it for fertilizers and things like that, but virtually most of this stuff is simply going overboard and being left to die in the ocean. Since the 1960s, the per capita consumption has doubled. We used to drink or eat rather about 10 kilograms of fish. Today we're over 20 kilograms. There's obviously issues with overfishing. There's the bycatch. There's the illegal harvesting of protected species, the mislabeling of products. I would say it's better today, but I would say even today, 40% of the white fish that you buy in a grocery store may or may not be what you think you're buying. You think you're buying cod. You think you're buying sole. When you see the size of the fillets today, they're relatively small. And these things can be tilapia, they can be pollock, they can be almost anything. Unless you are a real familiar person with eating white fish, the chances are excellent that you don't know what you're eating. And the laws are changing, the traceability laws are changing, and I'll be talking about that in a few minutes. Another thing, though, that people don't realize is the amount of human trafficking and the amount of forced labor that goes into the fishing industry. And that's something else. We talk about ecologically and what you would call free trade coffee. Well, you know what? There's the same thing that's happening in the fishing industry. And there's an awful lot of people out there that aren't getting paid for the work that they're doing. More and more now, you can look for these labels. The one on the left-hand side here, the Marine Stewardship Council label, the blue one. This you should be able to see quite often, particularly on canned goods, because it is meant for the catch of wild fish. So like tuna, you should be able to see this kind of thing, and you'll see it on a lot of frozen packages also. So look for that label. The middle one is something that you'll see. Now, the MSC one, the blue one, actually, I've been in their offices in Germany, and it's a little organization, totally nonprofit. But to get this label can cost a company anywhere between $50,000 and $100,000. It's almost like being ISO approved, if not more so. The middle one here is out of Monterey Peninsula in California. They handle both farmed and wild products, and they are a major force in the world for sustainability in fishing. And then the last one here on the other side is the aquaculture certified or seafood certified, and this is one that you'll be seeing more and more common also. So please look for those when you're out shopping. So we'll move now to traceability. And again, this is a topic that you could talk for days about, but I'm just going to give you a quick idea of what's going on in the world. And here I'm showing you a fish example, but this is happening for all products throughout the world now. Traceability is basically building a traceability chain that has the ability to identify a product as it goes through its life and processing, the ability to track it all the way through that system, and then after the fact, to be able to trace backwards. If you have a problem with the product, to be able to say, hey, where did this come from? What happened to it? And what can we do about it? Traceability became compulsory, and I use that in quotation marks, in 2002, when the EU introduced the General Food Law, and the USA did the same things. They did it under the auspices of the Bioterrorism Act. Canada kind of dragged its feet, but followed along with Europe and the United States, but didn't actually create its own act until last year. This is probably not surprising, but of all the major powers in the world, there are only two that have been a little reluctant or reticent to really move forward with this movement, and that would be China and Russia. But even they more and more are having to come forward, because what's happening now is major companies are getting to the point now where they will not buy from anybody unless they can supply traceability. I would suggest that even though call it 100% legally required worldwide, I would say we're at maybe the 40 or 50% mark of reaching that, but becoming more and more stringent every year. Here's what a simple traceability system would look like. The vessel catches fish, or the farm makes fish. They have to transport it to the processor. So we need to know where the truck was, what the temperature of the truck was, and so on and so forth. The product needs to be stored at the plant before it gets processed. So we need to know how it's stored. We need to know the temperature, the humidity of the room, et cetera, et cetera. Then it goes into the processing plant, and we have to know what temperature was it processed, how long did it take to get processed, what were the methods that were used to process it, and so on and so forth. Then again, it has to be stored and packed at the processing plant. All this has to be tracked back, even to the point where you track back where the packaging came from, who made the packaging, and what is the packaging made out of. Goes from there and it gets transported to the grocery store. And then it gets stored at the grocery store. And then finally we go in and we buy our little 12-ounce package of whatever, and we take it home. Now what happens is on that package now, you will always see some kind of a barcode or some kind of a QR code. And if you find something that's wrong with that, you can take it back to the store. And the company that I'm working with now, we are actually setting up a system where if you have that code, we in an instant can give you the lineage of that product all the way back to the date, the time of day, and the place in the world where it was caught, and everything that happened to it between now and then. Just for a vessel as an example, here's what our modules look like for a vessel. We need to know all the coordinates of the owner. We need to know all about the vessel itself, the name of it, the flag, does it have a license, so on and so forth. The fishing information, what area was the fishing done in? When did they start fishing? When did they stop fishing? Where did they unload it? How much did they bring home? Then the product information itself, what species was it? How was it preserved? What kind of gear did you use to catch it? How was it processed if it was partly processed on the way in? What was the quality of it when it came in? What's the country of origin? It goes on and on. It's just amazing what is being demanded of the industry today. And that is about it. I'm going to stop sharing here, and we can open it up. If anybody has any questions, I am more than happy. And I hope I just barely fell within the time limit. I might have been a little long there. I apologize. Heather, are you there?
Sorry. Yes, I'm
Amazing
here.
presentation, Jim.
Hello, this is Malcolm. I have a question.
Go ahead, question.
Okay.
I went on a tour of a fishing plant in Iceland many years ago, and they were processing fish that was fished around Iceland, but they had a large capacity in the plant, so they were importing blocks of frozen fish from Russia in order to relabel it, and these were 1 meter by 1 meter by 1 meter bricks of fish. So how much fish is caught in one country, processed in another, and sold in another?
That's a good question, actually, Malcolm, because, and you see this all the time. Quite often, you may see something that says product of Canada on it, but the fish actually might have been farmed or caught in China or Russia or the United States. Because what happens is the fish goes through different stages of processing sometimes. What will happen is a boat catches a fish, they kill it. And they may or may not gut it, but right away, that's processing. You've killed the fish, that's part of the processing. They bring it into the shore, they throw it in a truck, and they bring it up to the processing plant, and this processing plant is a small plant, and they will gut the fish and gill it and send it off with the head on and the tail on. And it will go off to a bigger processing plant possibly, who will say, okay, we're going to cut off the head and the tail. We're going to take the bones out, and we're going to make fillets out of it, and make nice fillets to sell. But they also might have a lot of scraps on the side that aren't really nice fillets. So they're going to take all that extra stuff, and they're going to make these big blocks of just chunk fish, and they're going to freeze those, and they're going to sell them to somebody else who is going to end up possibly making your fish patty that's in your sandwich at Burger King, or the fish fingers that we feed our kids, and that kind of thing. So where this stuff finally gets finished is basically where they say it's from. I'll give you an example that is not fish oriented, but I buy apple juice, Royal Mount, it's called, I think, apple juice. It's a famous Quebec brand. I buy these 2-liter bottles of it, and it is produced in Canada without additives from concentrate. The concentrate comes from China. This product that has been like a staple of Quebec, we're getting the apples from China, for God's sake. So you never really know what's going on.
Rougemont, Quebec.
Traceability is designed to try and track this stuff down.
Jim,
Anybody else?
I have a question, Jim. Marine biologists and oceanographers, do they have anything to do with the fishery industry?
Oh, big time today, big time. I mentioned the Seafood Watch, that middle label, the MSC and the ASC. These people are not just environmentalists or activists. These are groups that are using highly trained people, PhDs, and working very closely with fishing companies. What has happened, again, very much in the last 10 years, is that they go and they're working with the larger companies, the more socially responsible companies. And obviously, a small company in the middle of nowhere, it's going to take a long time to reach these people, but eventually we're going to catch up with them, because it's going to get to a point where the consumer, and therefore the producer, is not going to accept anything from anybody that they don't know its ancestry or its provenance. So when you see things like Blue Liner and Captain Highliner and Gorton's and God knows what else, these companies are all working extremely closely with those people. And as I had mentioned earlier, with the issue of how we fish, with the long lining and the dredging and this kind of thing, everybody wants to get away from it. But in the meantime, we have to catch the fish. And so they're trying to find better ways to do this, but that's a process that's going to take time. And obviously, the more and more that we get into fish farming, the less of an issue the catch methods are going to be, and we'll have more issues with the farming. But farming is something that obviously we will be able to control a lot more closely.